So how does a band go from being a one-hit wonder to literally inventing a whole new genre of music? Well, today we're going to dive into the absolutely incredible story of the Moody Blues. This is a band that didn't just change their sound, they went and changed the sound of rock itself.
I mean, just look at this. On one side, you've got this sharp-suited R&B group from 1964. On the other, you have the pioneers of symphonic rock, just 3 years later. And the wildest part? It's the same band. So the big question is, how on earth did that happen?
All right, so here's our roadmap. We're going to trace their journey from their early days through a secret project that changed everything, into their golden era, then a totally surprising rebirth, and finally, their well-deserved place in rock history.
Okay, let's start at the beginning. We're in Birmingham, 1964. And this was not the Moody Blues you might be thinking of, with the lush orchestras and cosmic poetry. No, this was an R&B band with a very, very practical origin story. Here was the original five-piece with Denny Laine out front on vocals. And get this, their first name was actually the M&B 5, which is a nod to a local brewery that sponsored them. Yep, their sound, it was pure British rhythm and blues, mostly covers of American artists.
Their first single completely bombed. But then came Go Now. It was a cover, and they promoted it with one of the very first music videos ever made. The song was an absolute monster hit. It shot to #1 in the UK, cracked the top 10 in the US, and just like that, they were international stars.
The only problem was, lightning didn't strike twice. Every single song they released after that failed. Go Now started to look less like a huge breakthrough and more like a total fluke, and the pressure was really starting to build.
And so, just 2 years after their massive hit, it was all over. They were drowning in debt, totally burned out creatively, and both the bassist Clint Warwick and lead singer Denny Laine quit. For all intents and purposes, the Moody Blues were finished.
But sometimes, hitting rock bottom is actually a blessing in disguise. This collapse forced them to reinvent themselves to survive. And they did it by bringing in 2 new members and one absolutely revolutionary piece of technology.
This change in lineup was everything. You swap out Denny Laine's R&B grit for Justin Hayward's beautiful melodic songwriting, and you replace Clint Warwick with John Lodge, a fantastic rock bass player. Suddenly, the entire musical chemistry of the band was just transformed.
Now, here was their secret weapon, the Mellotron. You can basically think of it as the world's first sampler. It's a keyboard that plays actual recordings of orchestral instruments. But the real key here was their keyboardist, Mike Pender. He'd actually worked for the company that built them. He wasn't just some musician who bought a new toy. He was one of the few people on the planet who truly knew how to master this thing.
So you've got this new lineup and this incredible new sound, and it sets the stage for one of the most unbelievable stories in music history. It's about how a desperate attempt to clear a debt accidentally created a timeless masterpiece.
Okay, you have to hear this. The band owed their label, Decca, a ton of money. Decca says, look, record a rock version of a classical symphony to show off our new stereo sound and we'll wipe the debt clean. But the band thought that was a terrible idea. So in secret, they used all the studio time in the orchestra to record their own songs, all structured around the theme of a single day. Then they took the finished album, Days of Future Past, and handed it in to a record label that had absolutely no idea what they'd been up to. The nerve!
And what they created was revolutionary. From Dawn Is a Feeling all the way to the iconic Nights in White Satin, the album takes you on a complete journey from morning till night. This wasn't just a collection of songs, it was a single, unified piece of art. They had basically invented the modern concept album.
And you know what? The gamble paid off. Big time. Days of Future Past was this huge, slow-burn success that launched the band into their most creative and influential period, an era that fans now call the Core 7.
From 67 to 72, these guys were just unstoppable. We're talking 7 landmark albums in just 6 years. Every single one was a massive hit, and they explored these huge themes of mysticism, space travel, and human consciousness. They weren't just making music anymore. They were building entire worlds with sound.
And they couldn't have done it alone. You really have to give credit to their producer, Tony Clark. He was absolutely essential in crafting those lush, layered soundscapes. His contribution was so important that everyone just started calling him the Sixth Moody.
But after the Core 7, the band was completely burned out. They took a 5-year break. And when they came back, the musical world had totally changed. Punk and disco had happened. But in a move that really defines their whole career, they somehow managed to reinvent themselves all over again.
So that organic, mystical sound of the 70s, the Mellotron, the flute, that all gave way to the slick, polished, synth-heavy pop of the 80s. With giant hits like Your Wildest Dreams, they completely embraced MTV and found a whole new audience, a generation that had probably never even heard Nights in White Satin.
But this second act wasn't without its drama. After Mike Pinder left, they brought in keyboardist Patrick Moraz from the band Yes. Well, his exit in 1991 led to this nasty lawsuit, which was televised on Court TV, all about whether he was a real partner in the band or just a paid musician. It was a pretty stark reminder of the business behind the music.
But look, lawsuits and drama aside, the band's legacy was already secure. They had pioneered a genre, they'd sold millions of records, and they influenced countless artists. Really, the only thing missing was the official recognition.
Let this number sink in for a second. Over 70 million albums sold worldwide. This was not some niche art rock band. No, they were a global phenomenon that connected with people across decades.
So when you boil it all down, what's their lasting impact? Well, their legacy really rests on four main pillars. They pioneered the concept album, they were huge innovators with the Mellotron, they fought for creative control by starting their own record label, and they just achieved this kind of cultural staying power that is incredibly rare.
And finally, that longevity got its due. In 2018, after decades of being eligible and huge fan campaigns, they were finally inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It was a really bittersweet moment, though, coming just a few months after the passing of their founding flutist, Ray Thomas.
Which really brings us to the final thought here. The story of the Moody Blues is this incredible tale of survival and radical transformation. They were an R&B band, then they were symphonic pioneers, and then they became 80s synth pop stars. It really makes you wonder, in the brutal world of the music industry, how many artists ever truly managed to reinvent themselves so completely, not just once, but twice?